Hello everyone, today we will be taking a look at the BTT EBB SB2240 and EBB SB2209 CAN toolhead boards. So as you can see, this is a 2 PCB system. There is a board-to-board connector here, and the smaller PCB sits in the StealthBurner, and the larger main PCB sits on the side of the Clockwork 2 extruder under the cable cover here. So let's take a look at the smaller, just a fan connector PCB first. So you can connect your layer fan here, or part cooling fan, or whatever you want to call this these days. I call it Kenny. The hot end fan here, and there's also a 4-pin fan header here if you want to use that, and you can, for example, use a PC style hot end cooling fan here if you prefer, and get RPM monitoring and better PWM control that way. So that's an extra fan header. All 3 fans here have their voltages individually selectable, so there are buck converters on this for 5 volts and 12 volts. So here we can select 5 volt, 12 volt or 24 volts supply for each fan, and yeah, that's I think a great feature of this. For example, as you can see, I'm running 12 volt fans on the hot end, and the same is also the case for the part cooling fan. You can connect your NeoPixel LEDs to this, of course, and the header for that is here. And there is another 4-pin header here, and this is for CAN bus. So if you want to connect CAN bus here, I don't really know what you'd use that for, but if you want to use it for something, it is there. I mean, it doesn't hurt, so not a big deal, but I don't really see much use for this, but yeah, it is there if you want that. And then the connection between these boards is through these DuPont looking pins, but of course this is a smaller pin pitch than the standard DuPont pin pitch. One thing I noticed with these pins, as you can see, the solder job isn't perfect. The solder, while it looks great on this side, it didn't flow through the PCB and make full contact. As far as I can tell, everything works, but it's just not the greatest solder job I've ever seen. But again, as far as I can tell, everything works just fine. Here is where you select the voltages of the fan. So the middle one for these two, these are the part cooling fan and the layer fan, hot end fan, and I selected 12 volts for those. This is the 4-pin fan, so you can select the voltage for that here, and there is another jumper here for selecting the voltage of the probes. So this supports inductive probes through here, both PNP and NPN, and 5 volt, 12 volt, 24 volt. You can also use this with Voron tap. That's what I am using, and you can connect the Voron tap here. If you want to use BL Touch for some reason, BL Touch is also supported, and you can connect that here, but I don't think many StealthBurner users are using BL Touch, but if you are, that is also supported. You can connect your X limit switch here, and you have a bunch of extra GPIO pins here. I think SPI bus is in here too, so if you want some further expansion pins, they are available here, and it is nice to see. One thing I don't like is these tiny connectors. These are a pain in the ass, and one thing I should note about these is the pins that are included in the box, which I'll get to later in this video. So these pins for those connectors. This is a 24 gauge wire, pretty common thickness, and this is not even like a thermistor wire or whatever with a thicker outer sleeve. This is just a 24 gauge wire, standard one, and as you can see, the outer jacket of this doesn't fit around the first crimp of the pin. So yeah, your only option is to crimp both crimps on the conductor, which really isn't recommended normally, but with this tiny of a pin, that is really your only option, and yeah, that isn't great. These pin jumpers are also tiny, as you can see, but those aren't as big of a deal. So you can very easily remove them and connect them, and yeah, they're pretty easy to use, so these are fine. I just wish the connectors themselves were larger, so that's about it. Here you can find the ADXL345, so you don't need an external ADXL345 module, just has it on board, and it's nice to see that this is right next to a screw hole too. I've seen this mistake made in the past where the ADXL345 is some random place on the board, not next to a screw hole. It should be as close to a screw hole as possible, and that way you can get better measurements from it. EVBlock has a video about that if you want more details, but yeah, it's good to see that that is an extra screw hole. Here you see a bunch of dip switches, so that is for the MAX31865. So this supports PT100s and PT1000s through the MAX31865 EBB2209, which is very nice to see. I am using a PT1000 as my RTD on my hot end, and yeah, my dip switches are configured for 2-pin PT1000. You can use PT100s as well. This also supports 4-pin mode for both of those. As far as I can tell, 3-pin isn't supported, but 4-pin is. And yeah, you can connect that here if you want. It is really nice to see that the PT1000 resistors for the MAX31865 are also included, because a lot of the time, because PT1000s can be read through a thermistor port, most MAX31865 implementations just skip that, and they're just there for PT100s. But even for PT1000, it's better to use a MAX31865. So it's nice to see that that is supported, and you can easily configure that using this dip switch. If you don't want to use an RTD, if you want to use a thermistor, there is a thermistor header here. So if you don't want to use PT100s or PT1000s, the regular old thermistors are also supported. This is your CAN bus and power connector. So the bigger pins are for the power and smaller pins are for the CAN bus. And behind that you can also find the USB connector here. So if you really wanted to, for some reason, you can probably run this as a USB Toolhead board as well, but I definitely don't recommend it. But you will still need to use this to flash the firmware to this. I flashed CAN boot to my EBB SB2240 in my case, and then yeah, I can easily reflash Clipper through the CAN bus. I don't even need to use the USB anymore, but for the initial firmware flashing at least, you will need the USB connector here. There is the fuse next to that, so the board is protected. This is your hot end heater connector, and it's a standard Molex microfit connector here, which is nice to see. The motor is also a standard connector, JST-XH. And here is the stepper motor driver. In my case, I have the TMC2240. You can also get it with a TMC2209 for a bit cheaper. TMC2240 is the newest TMC driver that I know of. It's supposed to run cooler, and it has a few new extra features, but you know, it's nice, but it's not necessary. You can go with the TMC2209 if you prefer, but yeah, I wanted to experiment with the TMC2240, so that's what I chose, and yeah, I've been pretty happy with it so far. TMC2240 just a few days ago got official Clipper support, so you no longer need to use the Big 3 Tech fork of Clipper to get TMC2240 support in Clipper. But before that, Big 3 Tech had a fork of the Clipper firmware that added TMC2240 support. So yeah, it was possible to use that like that, and I did use it like that for like a day or two, and then Clipper added support for TMC2240s, so I switched to that, and yeah, everything works pretty well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to further tinkering with this and comparing this to a TMC2209 down the line. But yeah, so far everything works really well. So yeah, that's the main PCB. Let's take a look at what's included in the box. In the box of the Razer, Big 3 Tech EBB SB2240 and EBB SB2209, you find 2 zip ties, 2 stickers, a Big 3 Tech sticker and a Big 3 Tech and Clipper, I guess, collaboration sticker. The usual Big 3 Tech dock, of course. This one works. Just a thank you card, the CAN cable, a bunch of accessories in this pack, which include the heatsink for the, I'm guessing, the stepper. 3 types of pins. These look like DuPonts. These are the tiny connectors they use instead of JST-XHs and whatever. And these mini-fits, micro-fits for the the heater, and a bunch of connectors in here along with some screws. And in this bag, inside the plastic container, you find the 2 PCBs. The smaller PCB that goes inside the StealthBurner, where you connect the fans and LEDs to this thing, and the main PCB here, the EBB SB2240. 2 notes about the included pins and connectors in the box. One is there is no JST-XH connector and pins included for the motor. So here, this female side is a, well, I guess pins are male, the connector is female, whatever. This side is a JST-XH for the extruder motor, and there are no JST-XH pins and housings included, so you'll have to use your own. Usually extruder motors come with JST XH already on the cable, but the cable is usually pretty long for Toolhead applications, so you usually want to shorten that. And well, if you want to do that, you'll have to use your own, which is not great, but yeah, something to keep in mind. And on here, this is a very minor nitpick, but still I think worth mentioning. Every single DuPont housing here for each female DuPont pin is an individual thing. So what I mean is you can get these in 2s, 3s, 4s, and you know, in that way you can easily just unplug the entire thing rather than plugging and unplugging every single pin. It would make life a bit easier basically. And yeah, instead of getting individual DuPont housings, it would be nice to see two 2-pin ones, two 4-pin ones, and one 3-pin one, and yeah, that would be easier, I think. So let's take a close look at the cable itself. This is the end that connects to the EBB SB2209/EBB SB2240. So you can see the two thicker connectors, these are for the power, and the two smaller ones, these are for the CAN. On the other side you find the CAN connectors on a JST XH connector, pre-crimped and ready. But the power connectors, they don't have the ferrules on them. You're supposed to crimp the ferrules yourself. And another thing I don't like is these wires look like, let me adjust the brightness, there we go. These look like they are pre-tinned, which is not good to see. You don't want tinned wires inside your ferrules, so I recommend cutting these and stripping these and crimping your ferrules after that. And you'll likely have to strip a bit of this outer sleeving of the cable as well. And if you look at the text on the cable, the specs of the cable are 26 gauge for the CAN, so 2 cores of 26 gauges and 2 cores of 20 gauges for the power. It's rated up to 80 degrees Celsius, which doesn't make this a good cable to use inside the Doom Cube, but for a normal Voron it should be fine. Supports up to 30 volts, so 24 volts is fine, and it is a PVC sleeved cable. Yeah, probably not safe to use in a drag chain. You should use this as an umbilical. And here is my Voron 2.4. This has been my test platform for the BTT EBB SB2240 in here on my StealthBurner toolhead. I've been running this for about a week, and yeah, I guess I'll talk more about that in a second. The EBB SB2240 is mounted behind this cable door and everything fits in there nicely. The CAN cable is connected back here, and the CAN cable is held in place by this printed part because there is no latch on the CAN cable, so that is definitely something you should keep in mind. You'll need a 3D printed part to keep that in place because, well, it's an umbilical. If you don't physically keep it in place, it's gonna come loose. So something to keep in mind, but there are 3D printed parts included in the Github repository, which I'll talk about later in the video. All the wires are connected here. One thing to keep in mind is connecting the thermistor might be a bit tricky. So I'm running PT1000 that's connected to the MAX31865, so that's connected here. But the main thermistor port, if you aren't running an RTD, is behind this black printed part, so it will be very difficult to plug and unplug. Definitely something to keep in mind, and yeah, it will be a bit awkward, so you might want to plug that in before mounting the PCB. And the power to the Dragon hot end heater is also a bit awkward. It's on the back side of the PCB. It's a microfit connector, so standard connector at least, and not likely to get damaged. But yeah, plugging it in blind is kind of like plugging in a USB cable blind. Like it takes a few tries, but yeah, it's still not a big deal. I'm using this with the Voron tab, and the Voron tab is connected here. Everything so far seems to work just fine. As I said, I've been running this for about a week. Initially, getting this to work was a bit tricky because getting CAN bus working on Clipper can be tricky, pun intended. And in the end, it ended up being a configuration error in the file you create in Raspberry Pi for enabling the CAN bus connection network thing in Raspberry Pi. So it was my fault, but I spent a few points, and again, the point is CAN bus on Clipper can be tricky, but yeah, this was my first CAN Toolhead board, so that's probably part of it. And yeah, after I got that working, everything worked just fine for, again, about a week, a little less than that, but about a week I've been using this. And this is open source, as you might expect, and everything is under the BTT EBB Github repository under this EBB SB2240-2209 CAN folder, so this specific PCB. Here you can find the firmware if you want, though I recommend just creating your own and flashing that instead. You can find the schematics, the pinouts under these folders. you can find the build guide here, and a pretty good build guide overall. It's obviously based on the Voron template, as you can see, and it looks like it is by Chaotic Lab. And yeah, this is actually a pretty good build guide. It goes over where you connect what, how to mount the PCB, where to connect stuff. So for example here, it says you can connect a part cooling fan here, and then this is the jumper you need to set for the voltage and things like that. So it's actually a very good build guide, much better than I've seen in the past. Here you have the pinouts, you can find that on the GitHub repository itself as well. And yeah, down here you can also find the flashing instructions. So yeah, overall a pretty good build guide. Again, much better than I've seen in the past. You can find it on the BTT EBB Github repository. There are also some custom printed parts here for holding the CAN cable in place, or USB-C if you prefer. Though I recommend CAN in this case, but yeah, if you want USB-C, it's an option, I guess. You can find those files there as well. And yeah, that clip just holds the CAN cable in place, and then there's this bridge to the Clockwork 2. So I guess I'll show those on the printer itself. So yeah, I'll link the GitHub repository for this in the description below. So I think that's everything, and it's time for the conclusion. I really like these voltage selectable fans, and I like the 12 volt and 5 volt buck converters are built on the PCB. As someone who runs 12 volt fans on the hot end and the layer fan, I really like to see that, since it's very rare to see on the market. Most just only support 24 volt. The Toolhead boards, that is, the main controllers tend to have the buck converter these days, but Toolheads still tend to only have 24 volts. I really like this PT100, PT1000, Max31865 implementation here, using these dip switches as well. As someone who runs PT1000s, another niche thing I guess, but yeah, as someone who does, I really like the ability to connect it direct to a Max31865, which is the better way to read an RTD than connecting it to the thermistor port. But the thermistor port is here if you just want to run a regular old thermistor. I like that it has the ADXL345 on the PCB as well, so you don't need an external ADXL345 module if you don't have any. You can just use this, and the results should be good enough. I like this supports the TMC2240 driver as well. As far as I know, this is the only PCB out there, not just Toolhead PCB, but any 3D printer PCB out there that currently supports the TMC2240 chip. I don't even think Stepsticks exists with the TMC2240 chip at this point, but yeah, it's a newer chip, and if you're like me and like to tinker with the newer stuff, I like that this is an option for this, and I'm happy to see that here. And if you don't want it, TMC2209 is definitely still an option. I do like the included CAN cable as well. It's a good length and it's a good quality cable. 3 meters is more than long enough, and yeah, the inside of it, the CAN wires are twisted, and yeah, overall it's a pretty good quality cable. It is not great for high temperatures, so that is something you should keep in mind, but unless you're running a Doom Cube or like a heated chamber or something, you should be good to go with that cable. And I'm still running that cable on my printer after about a week of using this, and it's a Doom Cube and it's still working just fine. So yeah, it probably should be fine in Doom Cubes as well, but ideally you want something that's rated for a bit higher of a temperature. What I don't like is mainly these tiny connectors. Like, these are a pain in the ass to connect and disconnect, and if you accidentally pull on the wire, you're almost guaranteed to pull the wire from the pin, because you can't crimp the pin of the, second crimp of the pin on the outer sleeve of the cable, because the pins are so tiny. So you're almost guaranteed to pull that, and even if you're careful, these are again not that easy to plug and unplug, especially when you are plugging two side by side. So yeah, that's probably my biggest, in my opinion, the biggest downside of this PCB. I can see that this PCB is very crowded, and it's also already a big PCB compared to other Toolhead PCBs, so I can see why they went with these tiny connectors, but I wish they could have figured out a different solution. Maybe get rid of some of these extra GPIO pins or something and just use slightly larger connectors at least. That would be nicer, but yeah, if you can live with it, I think it's still a great PCB for stealth burners with the Clockwork 2 extruder. Something to keep in mind is this is not compatible with every extruder that's compatible with the stealth burner ecosystem. For example, Galileo doesn't work with this, and well, I didn't check because it is large. I assume LGX doesn't work either, but Clockwork 2 works just fine, and I assume newer extruders developed by the Voron design team will work with this just fine as well, since there are plenty of people using these two-piece PCBs mounted on the side of their extruder, so I'm sure that's something the designers keep in mind as well. But at the moment, I think only Clockwork 2 is supported. So that's it for this video. Thanks to Big3Tech for sending this review sample of the Big3Tech EBB SB2240. This was just for an honest review and no money exchanged hands. If you're interested in buying an EBB SB2240 or EBB SB2209, there are links in the description below. That's it for this video. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please leave a like down below, and thanks for watching.